a very warm welcome to everyone, and thanks for joining us on this webinar about managing your commercial waste. So my name's James Ortiz, and I work in the waste management team, and my other colleague who's joining us on this is Donna Latham, and she also works in the waste team covering chargeable waste. So the webinar. So basically, we want to kind of cover off a couple of main areas, really. The first one being the legislation that's coming down the line, that's going to be starting very soon, about waste management, covering households and commercial waste. So it's a little bit about that. And the other half of the presentation will be about our commercial service that we offer, which Donna will talk to you about. And then at the end, we'll have time for any questions that you want to raise. So moving on to the first slide. Okay, thanks, Luke. So commercial waste. So what does that mean? So, I mean, very straightforward, really. Commercial waste is means waste from a premises that is used wholly or mainly for the purposes of trade or business. And that is kind of defined in legislation, which I will talk about on the next slide. Then we're talking about what or who decides what commercial waste is. So the government, UK government, has set this out again through the legislation on what commercial waste means, along with all sorts of other areas. So household waste, commercial waste, agricultural waste, industrial waste. So all those terms and what it means are all set out through the government's legislation, which I'll talk about in a minute. What's the role of the local authorities within this? So we call a primary waste authority. So we deal with the collection and disposal of waste, and we also deal with commercial waste, and that is through requests for our service. However, we can charge for that, which I'll talk about in a minute. So we cover quite a lot of different things and areas. So what do producers of commercial waste need to do? So we'll go into a little bit more of that a little bit later on. But I suppose the key thing is to make sure that you're aware of the changes that are coming down the line quite soon, and to ensure that you're compliant. That's the key thing, and again we'll talk about that in one of the other slides. It's worth noting that the Environment Agency are the key regulator for the waste industry, and although we're not going to go into detail about their functions as such, they're the ones that would be looking at compliance and asking for things like waste duty of care and that sort of thing. So you need to be aware that they have that function. The council also have a function for environmental regulation through our e-crime service, and they do have the authority to be able to go and ask businesses for things like waste duty of cares and that sort of thing. But the main overarching authority that manages regulation is the Environment Agency. Okay, the next slide, please, Luke. So legislation. So this slide really just covers off what the current legislation is and has been. You can see there's several things there. The very first one there, the Environmental Protection Act in 1990, is a primary legislation, I suppose you want to call it, that set out what we were going to do, the government were going to do about environmental pollution, and in that it covers off waste collection and litter collection and management. And within that legislation, that's where we get our definitions of things like household waste, commercial waste, what local authorities will do, and all sorts of different bits of information. So that's kind of the keystone kind of legislation that a lot of what we do is built on. Following that is the controlled waste regulation. So that kind of flows from that. Now, that's got 2012 as when that was enacted. There was a previous one in 1992, I believe. And this gets into more of the weeds, I suppose, about what these different things cover and what does commercial waste mean and so forth. So the 2012 regulations, because the local authorities were ended up collecting a lot of waste that was classified as household waste. So that's where we had a duty to collect that. Some of these in the old controlled waste regs, including things like self-catering properties, we were collecting that for a charge, but the problem we were having, local authorities were having, is that the amount of waste that they were collecting was creating a burden on them in terms of the council tax payers and having to pay for all this waste. So they started to look at all the different areas where local authorities were collecting and started to think, well, actually, some of these classifications were out of date, so they needed to change them. So in 2012, they updated that. So, for example, self-catering businesses, they have now become defined as commercial waste, where a charge for collection and disposal can be made. So there was a whole load of different classifications brought in for things like campsites, self-catering businesses, charities. There's a whole raft of them. So it started to classify this and to focus on who are the producers of this waste, and then it started to give the local authorities enabled them to be able to charge for these services and to charge for collection and disposal. So that's a pretty important piece of legislation there. Waste duty of care. Now this is part of what was set out in the Environment Protection Act, and this is where businesses have or producers of waste have to take reasonable steps to make sure that you manage your waste correctly. So that means storing the waste safely and securely, stopping it from escaping. So you're controlling that and limiting the impact that litter can cause through pollution and that sort of thing. So when you have a waste collection, commercial waste collection, you need to make sure you have this waste duty of care in place, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in some of the later slides. So it's a really important thing to have in place. Right waste, right place. So that's not legislation. That is that's information, guidance, really, that the EA produced a number of years ago for businesses, and it's a really useful. It's really clearly set out, lots of infographics, nicely done, and it kind of explains all the things around compliance and what businesses should do and that sort of thing. So it's a really good piece of information. All the links to these sorts of things will at the end of the slide, so we've got them there, so if you need to refer to them, you can do. So moving on to kind of more up-to-date legislation. So you may have heard of the Environment Act, and that is a new piece of primary legislation that was brought in a few years ago, and it doesn't replace the Environmental Protection Act as such. It kind of updates certain bits to it, but it also brings in new pieces of legislation covering off areas that weren't included in the EPA in the beginning. So looking at more to do with restoring natural habitats, more information, legislation around natural environment, increasing biodiversity, but importantly, looking at waste and reducing waste, and looking at waste in a different way, talking about it as a resource. So, so that the legislation we're going to talk about in a minute, simpler recycling, has flowed from that. So it kind of updates the EPA and gives it a kind of a much more modern, forward-thinking view of things. And last of all, we've got the waste hierarchy. So that little kind of diagram to the right on the slide, which starts with prevent, reduce, reuse, and so forth. So um, the waste hierarchy was introduced a number of years ago, and it basically defines what our waste management options are. And again, it's a key piece of information to enable us to look at how we manage waste. So basically, the top bit there, prevent. So when you're looking at waste management, that's where you start. You look at, well, how can we stop waste being produced in the first place? And you kind of go through those steps all the way through to the very last bit, which is recovery, where you've gone through all these different steps, reducing the waste, reusing the waste, and recycling your waste. And if you can't, you've gone through all those stages, you've done all that, and you end up with recovery. And instead of what we used to do, which was put it into landfill, we now take our waste in Cornwall. We take it to energy from waste facility where the waste is incinerated, and then the energy that's produced from that we produce electricity. So it's kind of like the hierarchy of things, the structure of where you should be looking to manage your waste, and you can apply this to your own businesses and as well, which is the key point. When you look at it, look at your business. What are you doing? What to prevent waste being produced in the first place, and so forth. And so it's a really useful structure there to put in place. Okay, next slide, please, Luke. So future legislation. So this is where we get into the here and now, really, and what we're kind of one of the main themes of this presentation. So simple recycling. So you may have heard this being mentioned a lot. So this is key kind of legislation which is flown from the Environment Act 2021. And this is where this is going to impact household waste and, importantly for you guys, commercial waste. And it talks about the different elements to the waste that you produce, and importantly about recycling and what that covers and what you should be doing. So I'll go into a little bit more detail in the next few slides. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of what that means. So there's elements that will come into play this year from the beginning of April of this year for businesses, and they're for businesses for small and medium and large businesses. So 10 employees and over. So if you're in that sort of ballpark, this legislation is going to come into play quite soon. If you're what they call the micro businesses, so under 10 employees, this will come in a little bit later, and I'll set that out in the next few slides. And then within that, so simple recycling, which we'll talk about in a minute, you've got other key pieces of legislation that are coming in, which may or may not affect you. So packaging, extended producer responsibility. So that's really aimed at those that use and manufacture products that produce packaging, and the government have put in place this form of taxation, I suppose, where businesses pay into a pot, and that money then is distributed to local authorities who use that to pay for the collection and processing of waste. So you can imagine there's a lot of products that have packaging. That packaging then ends up being collected by the local authorities or waste collection businesses, and that has to be paid for. So the government have now moved the emphasis on manufacturers to look at so how they produce their packaging, amongst other things, and trying to look at different ways, look at circular economy, where that packaging is reintroduced into the cycle and repurposed maybe and reused by the organizations, that sort of thing. So that's a new piece of legislation, and an important one as well, and that comes into play very soon this year. The other ones, again, not going to probably impact you too much, but it's worth noting. Deposit return scheme. So we remember in the old days where you used to get money for bringing back your fizzy drinks bottles and that sort of thing, which was a long time ago. But that kind of principle has been reintroduced, and that scheme is going to be brought in the next few years. So basically, this is where you return things like single drinks containers to a specific collection point where I don't know how that will work in practice, but you return those and then you get something back for that. And this is proven where they've trialed it to reduce littering of these sorts of items, single-use drinks bottles being one of them, and it'll help to hopefully drive up recycling rates, and it'll hopefully support the government's drive for a circular economy where those sorts of items get brought back into the system loop when manufacturing and that sort of thing. Last but not least is the emissions trading scheme. Again, this won't have any impact on you, but it's worth noting. So ETS is kind of one of the key elements for addressing the government's key elements for addressing climate change, and it focuses on operators that are emitting carbon in the processes they carry out. So we've got a energy from waste facility. This will impact us. So energy from waste that does produce greenhouse gases. So what it's trying to do is trying to limit that, and it'll create financial burdens on organisations to say, well, look, is there ways that you can start looking at the emissions that you're producing? So, for instance, are there ways of capturing the carbon, looking at renewable energy and improved energy efficiency? So it'll cover things like aviation, power, and those sorts of big industry sectors. So it doesn't really have an impact on small businesses, but it does on a wider scheme of things. And lastly on this slide is digital waste tracking. Now, this will have some impacts on what we do as a business, and particularly around things like duty of care. So now everything when you do your duty of care and lots of these sorts of information documentation is all produced on paper, and so a lot of these things now will be moving across to a digital format, and so it's a way of helping the government to manage and better regulate the waste sector. It will help businesses to comply because it will be all digitized, and it will help the government to understand better who's producing the waste as well, so you can track it. And it also feed into the circular economy and helped with that, getting maximum value from resources that we get. And importantly, it will reduce the crime, and that's one of the areas where you get bogus organisations who pretending to take your waste or managing waste who are not doing it correctly. So this will help to kind of weed them out as well. So, and in terms of you as a business, that's an area you need to think about is who is managing your waste for you, and are they regulated, and are they covered by the EA? And we'll talk about that in another slide. Okay, so that covers the kind of future guidance and legislation. So the next slide, please. So simpler recycling. So getting into this a little bit more. So this one's quite straightforward, really, in terms of the slide. So as I said, simpler recycling covers household waste, but it also covers commercial waste and businesses. And so where household waste is covering off particular items of collection for recycling. So in Cornwall, we're just in the throes of moving to a new collection service, which we started last year. So if you live in Cornwall, and you would have noticed, you'll be moving across to a food waste collection, and we're going to be finished rolling out that service this year. But so we're covering off things like plastic, metal, glass, paper and card, and food. And we also provide a garden waste service. And we will also be covering off food waste, and plastic films and cartons, which will be coming down the line in the future. But as a business, you need to start thinking about these core materials and how they are collected, and importantly how they are separated. So there will be through simpler recycling the onus on doing the separation and making sure that you have looked at that when you set up your recycling services for your waste collection service. The government has set a target of municipal waste, which is household waste, the majority of it, reaching a 65% recycling rate by 2035. So that's quite ambitious. To do that, we need to start collecting these different materials. And to do it well, you need to start separating these out so that you can produce good material, recycle it for repurposing, producers who turn those items into other things. So it's really important that we start to do that. Obviously, one of the key elements is reducing landfill. We don't take much of our waste to landfill anymore. Occasionally, we have to when the incinerator is elements of it are closed down for maintenance. We have to move it off to landfill, but all our waste is incinerated, and then the carbon emissions that are associated with landfill and incineration, we need to be mindful of that as well. So, and reducing carbon emissions from the production of the virgin materials. So, producing, plastic bottles, that sort of thing, all requires energy, oil, all sorts of things. So we're trying to reduce the reliance on that, and it's trying to support and grow the UK recycling industry and all the other areas within waste as well. So who does this affect? So it affects all households in England, and importantly, it's affecting businesses and the workplaces. So as I touched upon earlier, there's different timescales for businesses. So the government has set out what the different categorizations of businesses are. So basically small, medium, large, the ones that are going to be affected first, and then the micro businesses, which may affect the majority of people on the call, and they're going to come in a little bit later, which will be on the next slides. But excuse me, there are other elements and businesses as well. So it's important to see, things like residential homes, schools, hospitals, charities, and other places for public meetings like village halls. They all kind of come under the controlled waste regulations, but they're all covered by simpler recycling as well. So when's this all going to take place? This is the important bit. So from March this year, from the beginning of April this year, the majority of businesses are going to be impacted by the simpler recycling and what that means, and looking at particularly things like plastic film, which is an area that we will be starting to look at to collect in the future for households. 2026, so that's where household waste will start being including plastic films. We're going to be looking at other items as well, and covering off things maybe like cartons as well. So we've got another year before we start looking at that. And then the micro businesses. So the majority of you guys you're going to be asked to look, to be compliant from 2027. So that's the key point for you to look at your waste collection services and what you're doing, and making sure that you're compliant with the legislation by that point. So what do I need to be compliant? So I think the first thing there we've talked about is setting out an audit for your waste. So I think it's important really to understand what you're doing. So I'm being presumptuous here that business, some of the business you probably have waste collection services all in place already, but it's worth you looking at what you produce now, bearing in mind simple recycling and what that means. So it would be good for you to kind of look at that. What do you produce, and how simple recycling is going to impact you, and how you're going to have to split out those waste items and how they're going to be collected. So if you have got someone in place already, it's important to have a chat with them to talk about how you're going to be compliant with the legislation and how they will be compliant with that as well. So that's a key element. And I suppose, and that other bit there, can you reduce the waste produced? So coming back to that slide when we had the waste hierarchy, that's preventing waste, what we're doing to reduce that from the very beginning. We do produce a lot of materials. Do we reduce what those materials and things that we produce in the first instance? Ensure you are pre-sorting the waste. So that's something we've talked about along the way. So simple recycling, looking at this kind of segregation of your waste, segregating out your plastic items, your cans, your paper and your card, and your glass. That's going to be all incumbent upon us. And food waste, which is the key area for us in terms of the authority for our household waste collections, which we've started with our new service. Then you're moving across to, are you compliant, which we'll talk about in a minute. Register waste carriers, so that's an important area to check. So the EA have a site which we'll provide a link to, which shows you who waste brokers are, people who should be registered with the EA and are licensed to collect waste and to kind of store the waste and to process that waste. So you need to make sure that whoever you're using has one of these waste carriers licenses, because if you don't, you could get into trouble with the EA if they came knocking at your door when they ask for your duty of care. And last of all, waste transfer notes. So waste transfer note is basically every time you have a collection, you will be given a waste transfer note. Now, if you're having regular collections with a waste carrier, then these are generally signed off as one for the year, I think, and that will set out basically what materials they're collecting, who's doing that, and where it should be going. So it's basically a timeline, or it shows the process really. And so when people come knocking, the EA or our environmental crime officers, because they have the powers to do that and they can ask for that, they'll ask for the waste transfer note. All that information should be on there, and so they can see the flow of waste and how that works. And it's important to retain this documentation. And again, digital waste tracking, I don't know the ins and outs of that, but that might have a lot of that, the process for doing that all digitally now. So that will help businesses to keep track of what you're doing with your waste and how that works. So I've gone through quite a lot of information there around legislation, about waste, commercial waste, and the future and what that means. So I'm going to hand you over now to my colleague Donna, and Donna's going to talk to you about our commercial service which we run here at Cornwall Council. Over to you, Donna.
Thank you, James. So basically, I don't know whether you know, but the council does provide a commercial waste service, and we provide that to small to medium-sized businesses throughout Cornwall. Now, we're a small team. We pride ourselves in providing the best service to our customers, and we work closely with our contractors to ensure that we do that and that we provide an excellent service. And when problems do arise, and they will do, then we strive to resolve them as quickly as possible. We offer advice and guidance to our businesses who contact us, and that could be to do with how can they reduce the amount of waste they're producing, what's the best services available to them. So how we provide our service, we provide that through the council's household waste collection contract with Biffa Municipal, who are a national licensed waste carrier. Their experienced collection crews collect our commercial waste at the same time as they collect the household waste and recycling from each area. So we use the same vehicles, the same resources, and the same recycling containment, and this helps us to make our commercial waste service competitive, reliable, efficient, and also eco-friendly. So we have quite flexible contracts. We have different container sizes and collection frequencies to suit most businesses and budgets. But we recognise that we won't suit every type of business out there, and so that there are other licensed waste contractors that provide the same type of service as we do. Where we perhaps have the heads up with the with other competitors is that we don't charge VAT for our service, nor do we charge for delivery of containment or any waste transfer notes or documentation. We do also offer discounts to businesses that are perhaps run from a property that is council tax rated, because we recognise that they are already contributing through that council tax payment towards the collection. And so we do offer a discount for that. So our services that we currently offer, we have 3 different services. So we have a standard service, which is our weekly food waste collection, fortnightly recycling, and fortnightly general rubbish. We then have a commercial plus option 1, which is a premium service, and that is providing a weekly general rubbish collection on a Saturday. So that is aimed for businesses that perhaps already have an alternative collection contract in place for the recycling, and it's just the general rubbish that they want to use us for. Then we have commercial plus option 2, and that is a weekly food waste collection, a weekly general rubbish collection, and the fortnightly recycling collection. So we do have the link there to our web page. So what I would just like to say is that all of our waste, because we are using our contract through the household waste collection contract, all of our waste does stay within the UK. So all of the general rubbish, as James mentioned earlier, it does go to our CERC, or Energy from Waste plant, so otherwise known as Cornwall Energy Recovery Centre. And currently it's burning around 240,000 tonnes of waste a year, and that exports around 20 megawatts of electricity. So it's enough to provide electricity for around 21,000 homes. So just to clarify, James mentioned earlier that sometimes we do have to send waste to landfill. That would be as a very, very last resort. When we do the maintenance on, or when Suez, who manage the Cornwall Energy Recovery Centre on our behalf, when they do maintenance twice a year, basically they shut down one incinerator at a time. So there's 2 incinerators. So by just shutting down one, it enables us to continually burn the waste that's disposed of there. The bunker has the ability to store up to 7,000 tonnes of waste. So there is no reason for us to have to take anything to landfill when we're doing those maintenance. And that is down for something for Suez to manage, which they do. Everything, even down to the bottom ash that's produced from the burning, the metal is extracted for recycling, and the remainder of it is used for the construction and road services. So that's the general rubbish. Our recycling for the household and also for our commercial waste service, that does all go to various disposal sites or recycling sites in the UK. So, for example, our steel cans go to Swansea, where it's made into different steel products, including cars, bridges and cans. The plastic and bottles, that goes to the West Midlands, Kent, Derbyshire and Lancashire, where it's sorted, shredded, and it's melted to make many other products. For example, garden furniture, refuse bags and drainage pipes. So it's just really to kind of put people's minds at rest that we don't send our waste outside of the UK, and it is all either recycled or is processed into something else. So a couple of questions that we do get asked quite often within our commercial waste team is, particularly from properties that are providing self-catering holiday accommodation. So the question is that they are paying council tax. So why do they have to pay extra for their waste that they produce? So there's two kind of elements to that. So the property itself is rated by the Valuation Office Agency, and they have their various criteria as to why they value properties at either business rates or council tax. So for us, it's the controlled waste regulations that classifies the type of waste. So if you have a look at that, anything that's provided from a property, whether it's council tax or NDR rated, if they are providing self-catering holiday accommodation, that regulation classifies that waste as commercial, and therefore it needs to be treated treated as commercial waste. So there are places where they'll be rated as council tax, but the classification will say that they are household waste for which a charge can be made for collection and disposal, and it's down to the discretion of the authority as to whether they're going to charge for that service. I believe we do charge for those types of properties. The other question that also gets asked quite a lot. No, sorry, I've missed that one. Ignore that. So that's kind of where we are in terms of our commercial waste service and what office we have. So we've provided a nice link there, or various links to our services, to all the different legislation that applies to all businesses. And we'll also add in some additional ones there to do with the Cornwall Energy Recovery Centre and where our recyclables are sent to within the UK, so that you've got that information to hand. So I think that was the end of my bit. So I guess it's kind of over to any questions that anyone will have. And thank you very much for your time.
Yes, I can jump back in at this point. We've got a question from Serena. So this is a really good, important one. So if staff work remotely, i.e. at home, or are engineers on the road, do they count towards the 10 employees? So if I could hand that question over to you, James or Donna, and I'm just going to find the slide as well, because I think that might be helpful to put up that we had on that.
I suppose it's depending what what you're doing. So I mean, when we talk about businesses in the sense of from working from a home, I wouldn't have necessarily classified an engineer, because people work from home, don't they? I work from home and that sort of thing. So I wouldn't have thought it covers that sort of business waste, if you want to call it that. But you would have to look at that. I mean, when I think of businesses from home, I think of people who run like I suppose hairdressers and dog grooming services, that sort of thing. That would be what I would cover as a business in that sense. So yeah, I mean, I suppose if you're running any sort of commercial entity from your home, and you're producing waste from that, then that strictly speaking, that should be you should be presenting that waste as through commercial service. But I mean, there's probably lots of people who operate, under the radar, and it's difficult for us to know, isn't it, who's doing what. But I think certainly those businesses which are quite obvious in no sense, like running a hairdresser's, running a dog grooming service, that sort of thing, where it's quite obvious that they're running a business from the property. I would have thought it would cover that, but I don't know. Donna, is there anything you want to add on that? Or
so the only thing to add really is when we're looking at the number of employees that a business employs, it's about whether, say, a business has 5 restaurants or 5 cafes or pop-up cafes, and they have 2 in each premise. If overall it adds up to 10, then they all have to comply with the new legislation, so the new simpler recycling regulations. I think with working from home or the mobile engineer on the road, I guess it depends on if they are producing any waste in the first place. So I think it's about going back to having a look at where your employees are working. Are they producing waste, and whether that fits into any of the legislation. So I think businesses need to kind of do some homework as to if they are producing the waste in the first place.
And I'm moving on then. So Annette asks, is there a limit on the size of businesses that can sign up for the commercial waste services from the council? So I think you mentioned SMEs.
So we say we operate a service for small to medium sized businesses. Now we have various types of containment, so we can provide up to an 1100 litre commercial wheel bin, or we can go down as small as single-use 90-litre bags. So it really depends on what type of waste you're producing, if we're able to collect that, so if BIFA are licensed to collect that type of waste, and what your requirements are in terms of how often you want to have your waste collected, because we use the contract through the household waste collection contract. We are limited as to how often we're able to visit your site. So if you're requiring 3 empties or collections a week, that isn't something we would necessarily be able to facilitate at this time, potentially in the future. So at the minute we do weekly collections or fortnightly collections. So if you're a business that produces a lot of waste and needs more frequent collections, it may be that we can put in additional bins to service your business, or it may be that it isn't something that we can provide at this time.
Grand, thank you so much. So I hope that helps, Annette. Hannah, so Hannah asks, where do public meeting places fit in the schedule for simpler recycling? Are they small and medium or micro?
I suppose it's who's managing them. So, public meeting places can be part of parish halls, that sort of thing, or church halls. So I suppose it's the what they're being used for. So if they're sorry, my microphone's up there. If you're if you're running, I don't know, a commercial operation from there, so events, that sort of thing, where you're charging for it, it would be classed as commercial waste. In terms of who's managing that, then that will depend, I suppose. So different organisations might hire out the venue to use it, and I suppose they would need to make sure that their waste is collected commercially, because they're charging for whatever service or function that is from that village hall. So if the organisation that manages the facility is a parish council, then they will they'll be affected by this as well, as we are as a local authority. So they would be, well, most parish councils are very small in terms of the employees, but yes, they would be covered. They'll have to to comply as well. Anything else you want to add to that, Donna?
No.
I
think that was right. So, anyway.
Yeah.
Grand. So moving on to Claire asks, does a small home caterer, so someone operating from home, need commercial waste?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we get there's a lot of businesses you see now. It's quite common now that small businesses set up in little like street food kind of businesses, and they take their business all over the place, but they're producing, they're at home producing that waste. There'd be a lot of food waste potentially, so strictly speaking they should be, yes.
And it kind of links in as well with the question that Mel raised, which is, what are the costs? So is there a rates chart for different types of businesses? So I suppose looking at those home caterers, how much are they going to be paying roughly compared to your bigger organisations?
Yeah, so basically, for our commercial waste service, we charge the same rate for all businesses. Whether so so business rated properties will be charged a rate, council tax properties will be charged a different rate. As I said, we give them a discount because they're already contributing towards that through their council tax payments. How much businesses pay ultimately depends on how much waste they're producing. So the small business operating from home would only require, the I would say the standard service that we offer, and you can go down to the 90 litre bags, which is basically the cheapest option available because you're producing less waste and you're only paying for it for when you put the waste out. So that there is varying rates. Obviously, I can't answer for other providers, and their way they charge may be slightly different to us.
So jumping ahead, we've got a question from Simon. So Simon's got a couple of holiday lets, and Simon has waste collection sorted and is compliant. But he raises a good point that there's over 30k Airbnbs in Cornwall. So yes, we know it's an awful lot. And he's asking about the kind of enforcement against that. Is there any way that people can whistleblow against offenders, and what kind of powers do we have to take action against those?
So we are working extremely hard with our colleagues in our enforcement team, so the Public Health and Protection team, who have that enforcement powers to request duty of cares and go and ask how businesses are managing their waste. So yes, so in answer, yes, we are. We're working hard, and you're right. There is around 30,000 Airbnbs in Cornwall, and we do have that information, and we're working through a process to try and identify that with the data that we have on our mapping system. So that's the local land and property gazetteer. We do also, are very welcome to members of the public, other businesses telling us where these properties are, and we will act upon those. So we are all the time, every day, we're writing to property owners, informing them of what they should be doing in terms of managing their waste and the fact that it's classed as commercial, and signposting them to our own website, but also, to other waste providers. So absolutely, let us know. And also particularly with the transition that we've been going through in Cornwall, that there are incidences, and we know this, that domestic household waste containers, the grey 180 litre bins, have been delivered to holiday homes which are being let out. And we don't necessarily have a way of knowing that. So if people can tell us that that's what's happening, then we can make arrangements to have the bin removed, but also to notify the owners of what they need to be doing.
So jumping on, Emma raises a question. Shouldn't holiday lets be paying business rates and not council tax, as they are a business?
Yeah. So I think I mentioned a bit earlier about the valuation office, and it's them that actually determines whether properties should be paying business rates and whether they should be paying council tax. And there is criteria, and there's a threshold in terms of how much income they are receiving from the business. So if they hit that threshold, then they are switched. They're told that they need to be business rated. So there are a lot of holiday homes that don't hit that threshold. And therefore they'll stay on council tax. So unfortunately that isn't something that we have any kind of say over.
This is a question from Claire next, and I think probably actually really touched on it already in terms of the enforcement. She raises certain places around Cornwall have an awful lot of holiday accommodation. So Claire mentioned Sun and Cove, 75% holiday accommodation. So again, it's a question about that enforcement, really. How do we check on these? And I guess again, it's the help there, isn't it, to let us know about those places?
Yeah, I was just had a message from a colleague in the environment e-crime team. So just to remind, so when you're providing, you notice that as a business, particularly self-catering, if you're reporting someone that you think hasn't got collections, so you need to provide that evidence. It's so that the e-crime officers can they need that evidence. You can't just say, oh well, it's this property here. I think there needs to be more than that. So for them to help them do the work in following that up. So it's worth noting that. Sorry, what was the follow-up question about Seven Cove?
Yeah, it's just about the enforcement aspect, really. So I think we've covered that, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think to add to what Donna was saying about Airbnbs and the process that, we've been undertaken, for a few years now, of trying to find and identify these properties. It's, there's thousands and thousands of self-catering properties in Cornwall. And it's not straightforward as when you got cafe, you got them, the name, and it's easy to see. With self-catering cottage, it's not always obvious, so it does take time to find these. But we have done a lot of work over the last few years in identifying these properties, and in that work that we have done to identify them, we have contacted them to advise them what they should be doing, and moving across to a commercial service if they don't have one. So we've identified thousands, literally is thousands, and have contacted them. So they've either come across to us as a waste collection, or they've got someone else in place, and we've stopped collecting them through the household waste service, which is the important thing. And so there's a lot of work, and it will carry on. There's properties pop up here and there all the time, and Airbnbs are difficult to identify because they're not so obvious as working for a holiday let company that's got all these properties that about. So it's a bit more difficult to find them.
Just to finish up then, so Claire asks, how much does it cost for 100 bags? And I think probably us sending out a link to those prices is probably going to be the better option for that. But do we have any rough costs we know off the top of our head for 100 bags?
Not off the top of my head, but I'm more than happy to provide the link to our services. Or our emails are at the end of the slide as well. So if you want to email myself direct, then I'm happy to kind of look at a quote for you.
Great. So we'll send those emails out as well afterwards. So fantastic. Thank you so much. And Claire also asks, if I take my commercial waste to the tip, can I register with the EA? So I guess that's the Environment Agency, to become a licensed waste carrier.
Yeah. That's what it's there for. So the small man with the van type thing, those people that go around collecting waste, they should have waste carrier licenses, and that's the whole point of the duty of care and waste transfer notes, so that that they are who they say they are, and they're disposing of your waste correctly. So that's the whole point of having a waste carrier's license. So yes.
So it's just important to note that is, as in when you say the tip, that is to one of the transfer stations, not the household waste recycling centres.
Oh yes.
Commercial waste is not accepted at the household waste recycling centres. So yes, you can become a licensed waste carrier. There's different tiers depending on what type of waste you're carrying and the quantity, but that would have to go to places like the disposal sites, so the sites that are managed by Suez. So Conan Bridge, and I mean they're dotted right across Cornwall, Launceston, Poole, St Earth.
Janie asks about milk. Is there a provision for milk that has been wasted off in a retail setting? So Janie's current food waste contractor will take food waste but not milk. So is there a local service for occasional milk waste?
Gosh, that's a good question.
It is. I don't know. It depends on the provider, isn't it? I mean, there are anaerobic digesting companies that we use to take our food waste to, who do provide collection services to businesses separately. So I think you probably would just have to look for those. There's one up in Holsworthy that we use, and one in Langage, which is outside of Plymouth. So it might be worth contacting them to find out, but it's not something that we provide.
But we can certainly go away with that and see if any of our colleagues in the waste team know of any providers that will do that. You know, like we've got companies that go around taking waste oil. It may be something that there is somebody out there that does go around doing the milk waste. So we'll do some research and we'll get some information back to you.
A asks, do you send out special bins for your commercial waste removal for a holiday let?
Yes, so our commercial waste containment is all branded as Cornwall Council Commercial Waste. So we have blue bins and blue commercial waste bags. So it's quite obvious that it's our service, and it makes it a lot easier for our collection crews to identify the waste that they should be collecting or shouldn't be collecting.
Just to finish up here, one more. So Emma asks, where are the small holiday lets expected to store the pre-sorted waste in bags and containers ready for collection?
It's certainly a question that we get asked a lot in our team, and there isn't a fast answer to it. I guess it's about just trying to look at the best way of separating your waste, particularly, I'm assuming that you are a small holiday let, so you're going to be a micro firm, so the legislation is not going to hit you until 27. However, you still have to do that pre-sort, and it is difficult trying to weigh that up and trying to find space to contain it. I don't know if that really is answering your question, but we do appreciate it is very tricky to find space. And it's about, as a business, doing the best you can and trying to remove as much of the recyclable waste as possible.
Great, thank you so much. I hope that helps you, Emma. And Faye, so just going to fit in one more question. So Faye follows up and says, will there actually be anaerobic digesters in Cornwall? So again, I suppose that's something you have to go and talk to your waste carrier about, I guess.
Well, I mean, yes, we don't use any in Cornwall at the moment, so I imagine there aren't many, or I mean, you'd have to have a look, but maybe in the future there will be, definitely, as food waste becomes more important and to collect, and the sources of food waste could branch out into agricultural food waste to industrial. There's all sorts of different areas, so I wouldn't be surprised in the future that those sorts of facilities will be built in Cornwall, but there aren't any at the moment. They're not, and there's no plans at the moment to do that. So
great, thank you so much. So I think we have to leave it there. So we are over time, over 20 minutes on questions there. So thank you so much, everyone, for asking your questions to us. And I found that really informative, so I hope you all have as well. And thank you very much, Donna and James, for your time today.
no problem.
You've been
Pleasure.
very, very generous. And we will send out an email after this with all the links to all the information we talked about, and particularly about the costs, because there are quite a few questions there about costs.
Yeah.
And also Faye asked a question as well about the energy from the waste incinerator and what happens with that. So we'll include a link to that as well, because we've got a web page that has all the information about that as well. So I think with that, we'll wrap it up and we'll let everyone get back to their days. So thank you very much again, Donna and James, and thank you from me as well. And I hope to see you at a webinar coming up soon. Please do come along to the licensing one if that's of any relevance. So thank you very much, everybody.
Cheerio. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.